This is the Birth, Baby, and Life podcast with Kristen Burgess, and we're talking about how babies can impact your health in episode number 217. Hey Mama, again, we are taking a deep dive into something that we touched on in an earlier podcast episode. We are going to talk about how babies impact, particularly how they positively impact your health in episode number 217. If you don't know me, my name is Kristen. I am a pregnancy coach and I work with mamas all over the world, helping them to enjoy a healthy pregnancy, grow a really healthy baby, and prepare for a beautiful birth. I also work with mamas who are trying to calm the chaos at home so that they can have a calm, peaceful home full of healthy, happy kiddos. Now, again, I'm excited about this episode because I think that this topic is a lot of fun. And I also feel like it's something that's a good topic because often we are, you're facing like the wine memes, right? I don't get it, but I don't drink. You've always got mom memes where the woman is like, oh, I've got to go get the wine, I guess, to be able to deal with the kids, or maybe the husband and the kids who is always characterized as a bigger kid, which, it's just like disrespectful all around. I will tell you, this is a bonus tidbit. I have been doing some reading and studying on relationships and stuff like that, and one of the things that was in this book is Alison Armstrong's book, The Queen's Code, which is, again, about relationships and is definitely probably going to ruffle some feathers for some people. So just if you decide to read it, know it going into that. But Alison talks about how when you're frustrated with men, ask yourselves, or mentally say to yourself, maybe he has a good reason for that. And I have actually found that little phrase has been so powerful with my kids because it causes me to pause for a minute when they are, being kids and go, maybe they have a good reason for that. And the little voice in my head says, even if it's not actually a good reason because it's childish immaturity, they seem to think that they have a good reason. Like, to them, it is a good reason. And that gives me pause to slow down and to think about it from their perspective. And then I think I've been able to approach my kids more respectfully. So all of that was a little tangent based on this whole wine meme and kind of its inherently disdainful of motherhood and how families impact a mother's health, but it's also disrespectful to men and children and I think to ourselves as well. Like, who wants that to be their life, right? So anyways, little tangent there. But I am excited about this episode because, again, I think it's a lot of fun and I think it's a needed counterpoint to so many of the narratives about motherhood being drudgery and all that. And I've talked a lot about it from a logical perspective and an ideological perspective and an archetypal perspective and a rite of passage roles perspective. And I'm sure I'll touch on some of those things here too. But I just wanted to talk about it from let's look at, okay, what are the actual positives, as science says, come from being a mom? So yeah, let me look and make sure that I'm going to get everything in. Y'all know I'm a notes person. So, and I did touch on this in a previous episode, so a little bit of this is review. But pregnancy has positive long-term health impacts for you. A lot of women are like, oh my gosh, pregnancy ruined my body and this, that, and the other. And let's go back to the last episode where I talked about prevention. And I want to encourage you that if you slow down a bit during pregnancy, that if you eat really well, that pregnancy is probably not going to wear you down as much. I mean, there can be, like, when you're carrying around a 9-month grown baby, 40 weeks, 41, 42 weeks baby, there's some physical exertion going on there. And birth is an athletic event. I say that often, and I want you to take your recovery time. As I talked about in the episode where I shared my birthing wisdom, I shared some about that postpartum rest time and that I think that's important. So I'm not saying that those things aren't tiring, but again, many of the things that we strive for in life, running marathons, doing sporting events, completing a good project, an important project at work, all of that can bring fatigue with it. So yeah, pregnancy can bring fatigue, and sometimes there's intense demands on our bodies from pregnancy, but it's not something that should break you, so to speak. So looking at prevention is a good thing, and that goes back to the last episode. But we do often hear kind of a negative thing, though I enjoyed my pregnancies, even though I can say that some of my pregnancies were really challenging. I also would say I enjoy pregnancy. I have said a few times I would love to be pregnant again, just to have that experience again. And so even when there's difficulty, I think there can be blessings and joy in it. But we know that pregnancy actually does benefit our health. We know that there is a reduction in risk for certain types of cancers, for example, for women who have been pregnant. And sometimes the effect is with one pregnancy, and sometimes the effect seems cumulative if you have more than one pregnancy. But we know that breast cancer, ovarian cancer, endometrial cancers, all of those are lower for women who have been pregnant. And a lot of times breastfeeding brings these benefits as well. So one of the things, like particularly with breast cancer, is that when women have had a lot of pregnancies and when they have breastfed for, a long time, or breastfed cumulatively over many, many, many months between many children, those women are at a lower risk of breast cancer. And you'll sometimes see, like, I've talked about this on previous podcasts, but if you haven't listened, so a mom who has one kid is, a woman who hasn't had kids yet is nulliparous. And then there's a woman who has a child, and then once she's got multiple children, she's a multip. You'll hear that, multip. And then once a woman has 5 or more children, she's a grand multip. And in the medical literature, there's a lot of talk about the risks with grand multips and that kind of thing. And I also think a lot of that is prevention, though I think we need to be aware of it. But there is also research that shows that even if you are a grand multip, you may enjoy benefits. And there may be some benefits that are cumulative. So I'm not writing a prescription here, ladies, for you to go out and have a lot of babies. But if you know you want a lot of babies, or if you find yourself in the position where you've had a lot of babies, know that some of these benefits are for you and may even be magnified because you've had those babies. We know that women often have positive cardiovascular results and potential heart disease protection. We know that even if women have experienced cardiac trauma during pregnancy, which can happen, there's a complication called peripartum cardiomyopathy, and other cardiac complications actually seem to be one of the maternal health problems that's on the rise, which is why I've mentioned it quite a lot. I think most women know about preeclampsia or toxemia is the old-fashioned name for that. They know about postpartum hemorrhage, but these heart problems are also a problem. And it's why if I've got a woman who said, I'm out of breath and I just can't do anything and I'm dizziness and everything, I usually will tell that woman, if she's in the group, I'll message her and say, this is a list of pregnancy warning signs. You may want to let your care provider know you're seeing this, because those are usually cardiac signs. And so I don't think that's something that we should overlook. But the reality is that even if women have pregnancy-related cardiac issues, often there is an interesting healing that happens. And we talked a little bit about this microchimerism that happens, and we believe that that might be some of the reason that women's hearts just seem to be able to heal in ways that cardiologists wouldn't have believed that they could. And then overall, there just seems to be protection. And this seems to be, and breastfeeding, again, is a big thing, because breastfeeding seems to improve insulin sensitivity and metabolic health overall. So these are things that during pregnancy, especially a properly nourished pregnancy, because pregnancy is a changed state, and if you don't nourish yourself in a way that is physiologically correct for pregnancy to support expanded blood supply and those kinds of things, then is there a greater risk of things going wrong than if you were not pregnant? Probably so. But if you properly support the pregnancy, then you're able to really enjoy some of these benefits and some of these fruits. Many women notice, especially once they get past the first trimester can be difficult, ladies. Once you get past the first trimester, a lot of women experience hormonal benefits, and a lot of women experience lasting menstrual health benefits too, as well. I know that for me, that was true. It's not true for every woman, but for me, I had really difficult periods before I became pregnant. And then since I became pregnant, I've only had a handful of periods that were really anything at all. I usually have some cramping on the first day of my period, and it's just more of a little bit of a discomfort. And then nothing else for the rest of my period. And I can think of one time in recently where I had really bad cramps. And I think part of that was stress induced because we were traveling and it was just, it was not a great situation. But yeah, so many women experience that their periods become more manageable. Women who have had problems such as endometriosis will often notice that sort of thing resolves. Sometimes things like PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, can resolve after a pregnancy. Not always, but again, we think that a lot of that is related to inflammation and to hormonal imbalance and to metabolic health. And so pregnancy and breastfeeding are shown to help with those conditions. And sometimes as well, the good habits that you put in place during pregnancy actually increase your health overall so that you feel better and more well, and metabolically you're healthier overall. As long as you keep those health improvements in place throughout the duration of your life, following the good habits that you learn in pregnancy. And sometimes you have a motivation to do that because you've worked so hard to have this little person, and now you want to nourish this little person in a good way. I just downloaded again a Kindle book. I put it back on my Kindle, Karen Lebillin's book, French Kids Eat Everything, because I've noticed some picky eating really start to creep back in, especially with my younger two. And so I thought, well, I'll sit down and read that, reread it again, because this is a great book. It's totally unrelated to this topic, but it's about what kids eat in France and how we help picky eaters diversify their palates a bit. So anyways, looking at what we can do, and that's motivated by my kids, but I know that ultimately I will work on making sure overall that our diet is rich and nourishing, and that I minimize some of the stuff that they may be choosing over the nourishing foods and maximize the amount of nourishing options that they have. And that's motivated by my love for them and my recognition that I want them to thrive and do well. And it also has side benefits for me because it helps me to make healthier food choices too. And I think that's when you have a newborn and only one little one, it's not as big of a deal because they're going to be, nursing for months. But still, nursing moms pay attention, and then it's time to feed baby. And so, yeah, there's just a greater awareness overall, I think, of nutrition and lifestyle. And that all comes because you're a mother and you're responsible for another person. And I think I'll come back to that because let's talk about, some other practical benefits before we get into maybe some of the relational benefits or some of the mental and developmental benefits, so to speak. But, there are benefits for breastfeeding on maternal health. So we've got hormonal balancing, that sort of thing, like the oxytocin release. When you breastfeed your baby, your body releases oxytocin, which helps everything down there get back to the way it needs to be, because oxytocin causes the uterus to contract, and that just keeps you healthy and healing. So it helps in that immediate acute period of healing as well as long term. And as I mentioned, there's a breast cancer risk reduction that's definitely correlated with breastfeeding and with the length of breastfeeding. There's a lowered risk of type 2 diabetes. I think I mentioned that on the previous podcast episode too, because it seems like insulin sensitivity is better for breastfeeding moms, and it may overall lower that risk. Now, this also ties into the last episode where I believe that we need to use prevention and we need to make changes so that a woman, because we know if a woman is diagnosed with gestational diabetes, whether you think that's a real deal or not, we know that she's at risk for type 2 diabetes later in life. So we want to make sure that we're getting all of the benefit by, again, making those lifestyle changes and the nutritional changes in pregnancy, and then you get even more added protection just from being pregnant with, birthing, and breastfeeding your baby. And then also another thing that we know is that moms who have breastfed their babies have stronger bones. At first, they wondered, could this be because it looks like pregnancy uses a lot of calcium, and then breastfeeding, you're pulling calcium, and it seemed that mother's bones may be weaker. But what we see is that when moms begin laying down calcium stores after pregnancy and birth, they actually are laying down stores that create stronger bones overall. So a woman is going to be less prone to osteoporosis later in life if she's nursed her babies. And I think when you think about like women in the past, and you think about these strong old ladies who were able to go out and do things like they were hardy women working in villages. And then you think about, some of the fragility that we see in older women today, and what were the differences. And I think one difference was that those women were breastfeeding. And then right now we're seeing a generation of women get older for whom breastfeeding wasn't the norm because the formula industry came along and convinced mothers that they needed to formula feed. And I'm not going to go into a formula feeding versus breastfeeding debate. I breastfed all of my babies. I fully believe that when we are looking at human flourishing and optimizing infant health and maternal health, the clear winner is breastfeeding. I understand there are some moms who cannot breastfeed, but I feel like overall, this plays into the societal things that I've talked about so much. As a society, we need to support breastfeeding, not express breast milk. We need to support mothers and babies together and breastfeeding. And then if a mom needs to express for some reason, okay. But we need to support breastfeeding and make that a possibility so that, because I know so many moms are like, well, I have to work, I can't breastfeed. And so as a society, we need to make shifts. But breastfeeding is definitely the clear winner. when it comes to infant health. It literally, I have a handout that's the benefits of breastfeeding on one side and the risks of formula feeding on another side. So it is very true that, breast milk is the ideal. And really and truly, women didn't start questioning that until formula became an industrial capitalistic powerhouse. And I say this as a business owner, I'm a fan of capitalism, but I think in some ways it's been evil. And that's one of the ways that I think it's been evil. And also, I think that this strong focus on getting women in the marketplace so that they become cogs in this, weird industrial capitalist anti-motherhood cog apparatus that we have, that is part of what's going on with removing women from their babies and from breastfeeding. And that's a big thing, and it doesn't really have to do with women's liberation. It has to do with somebody's pocketbook getting lined. So anyways, when we look at those little old ladies in the past who maybe were more robust, they had breastfed their babies. And another thing is I think they got in a lot of more movement and dynamic movement throughout their days, which helps. When you are actually using your body is stronger. And when you are putting some stress on your muscles and bones, they get stronger. So we want that movement. So I didn't want to leave that off and just say it's all because of breastfeeding or not. But I do think when we look at the little old ladies, the ones who are healthier overall are the ones who were pregnant and nursing and hopefully who are moving and out there. We also talked a little bit about microchimerism, and that's, when the fetal cells, the cell-free DNA, is floating around in your body and stays there for a long time, perhaps even longer. We know that women who show higher levels of fetal DNA in their bodies are less likely to have any sort of illness later in life, and they're less likely to even have, for example, cognitive impairments. So women are less likely to struggle with dementia or Alzheimer's disease if they've got more fetal DNA in their bodies. So that it's actually protective of you as a mom. And I think that's just so cool. And it may play a role in tissue repair. Like I mentioned in the abortion episode, there is evidence that an aborted baby boy's fetal stem cells repaired a mother's liver from damage later on. Rebuilt part of her liver, which was just unprecedented. And then we look at moms who have had cardiac damage happen. And the way that researchers know this is because the cells that are rebuilding, these organs do not belong to the mother. And so they look and they see, and they're able to match those up, those fetal cells with the baby that they went to. So it's really, really interesting, cutting edge, newer science, it's known about. But it's really kind of cool. So the fetal cells can persist for decades. And I'll link to some articles below so that you can read more about it if you're interested in it. And then we've got this psychological and emotional health benefits of motherhood. So we kind of covered some of these physical health benefits. And another thing, before we leave physical health, I want to say that a lot of people will ask me, Kristen, how do you have so much energy? Or Kristen, how are you so youthful? And especially with 8 kids. And sometimes I think it's because I've had to chase my kids around. And I think it's because I have had to stay limber in my mind, partially because I'm researching pregnancy and birth, but I also spend a lot of time researching parenting, researching pedagogy, education, researching different topics that they're learning about in homeschool so that, if I forgot it from when I was in high school, I can refresh my memory on it. And so there's just a lot of mental gymnastics going on, as well as literal physical gymnastics going on, chasing all these people around. And sometimes I think that has actually helped me to stay youthful. That is an N=1 kind of statement. I don't have any research evidence behind that, at least that I've found recently. But I do believe that these sorts of things, it's not happenstance. And you'll meet many moms of many who will say a similar thing had happened with them. So I think that's just kind of cool. So now let's go kind of these psychological, emotional, mental health benefits. And I talked a lot about this in the Motherhood series that I did, but I do believe that pregnancy and birth are a rite of passage. I think that they're very important, and they grant a sense of purpose to women. I do believe that a career or a life passion can grant a sense of purpose. I'm here talking to you because I feel like serving mothers and babies is a sense of purpose. I actually have a document written out where I have kind of broken down what do I feel like my calling is, what do I feel like the primary objective of my life is, And part of that is serving mothers and babies. I do feel like that's my purpose. But my children and raising them, mothering them, being present for them, maintaining bonds with them, that is also a primary part of my purpose. And educating them has been a primary part of my purpose. And it has been a good thing. Like I said, it has served me well. It has kept me dynamic and youthful and creative and learning and doing brain gymnastics and all that kind of stuff. So it's been a blessing to me. So it helps you have a sense of purpose and also have a sense of fulfillment. And it can bring, I tried to be balanced in the mothering episodes where I talked about the fact that it can bring stress. I mean, there's something going on with some of my older kids right now that it's difficult. It makes me feel sad, but I hold lightly because I know that the end product of this project of mothering is me, and me being the me that I want to be, and I get to release them, hold lightly, to be the thems that they are. And so, I do hold lightly, but I also really feel like there's great benefit. And even as I watch they're launching from the nest and it feels like there's a bit of trepidation, I feel really proud of them, and it's really exciting to see what they're doing with their lives and how they're reasoning and interacting with the world and starting to make choices and decisions. And that feels fulfilling on some levels, just like my little ones are fulfilling. And I will admit, I'm one of those moms now. Like when I see a mom who's got like 3 little people, has a baby on the hip or a baby on the breast and a toddler and maybe a preschooler, I feel a bit of nostalgia. I'm like, I remember when I was that mom. And part of it is because even though there was nitty gritty, like there is so much hope and idealism in that period of like, this is what I'm going to do. This is the mom I'm going to be. And of course there's days that are tough, but there's still this hope. And then when you're at the point where I'm at, where, they're getting to shift to the older, it's like, okay, I've got a limited number of years left to make an impact. And I'm seeing kids who are grown, and you realize how finite that time is. And there's that just sense of optimism, and all of that is just a blessing of motherhood. And I'm not saying we can't find optimism and hope and vision and that kind of thing in other pursuits, but I do think that motherhood offers this beautiful gift that is just lovely. It's really just lovely. So motherhood has those positive impacts as well. It also helps us to foster resilience, to learn coping techniques, to learn how to handle relationships. I really think that there is a great level of maturity that comes with motherhood that I'm not really sure one can get in other ways. I always say that I think that childless individuals have historically brought a lot, have served a lot, have been able to serve in ways that people with children may not be able to. But I also do feel like being a parent forces you to grow up, and it forces you to look at somebody beyond yourself. And you can even see when there are parents who have not been able to make that transition, and their adult kids will look back and go, they were, it was always about them. They were never able to make that transition. But I think that most parents do figure out a way to do that. I was talking to a friend who was working with doing a class in the jail with art. So she's working with all these burly, gruff men. And she was showing off the little tiles that they had done. They did Zentangles. And one of them, the fellow had put his child, I can't remember if it was a boy or a girl, but he had put his child's initial and then done his Zentangle around the letter that was his child's name. And I was just thinking, here's this big burly guy who did something to mess up a bit and end up with a jail sentence. And what he chooses to focus on in his artwork is his son. And so, even people who have made mistakes or messed up, their hearts are often, their guilt is often not so much in how they messed up, but how they let other people down, and especially often how they failed their children. So I think that children, even if they're not always enough to bring an individual to change, because we see people who haven't been able to change on behalf of their kids, I think that there's a greater chance of that happening. And so having children brings you a level of maturity and a level of perspective and the ability to step away from being quite so self-absorbed, because you have to consider somebody else. And that, I think, is actually a gift. It's a huge gift. Also, we think that motherhood research shows that being a mom increases our empathy and our emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is really, really important. And all of that is developed through mothering, again, because you're having to pull yourself away from just you, and you're having to, it's like I was talking about thinking through with my kids, maybe they have a good reason for what they're doing. And even if I think to myself, it's not very logical, but to them it feels like a good reason. And that helps me to have empathy and to come to them and give them a correction, which they often need, give them correction with more respect and more empathy, and to step back. And especially thinking about my teenagers, I want to come at every interaction with them with respect, because I want them to feel that inherent dignity as they step out into the adult world and confidence in themselves. And I want them to understand healthy ways to model correction or conflict or that kind of thing. And so it's important to me to have that foundation of respect. So all of that empathy and emotional intelligence, and even with toddlers, like you've got to have so much emotional intelligence and empathy to deal with toddlers and their antics, which, you know, it may be logical to the toddler, but it's like, oh my gosh, will you just go to bed? And so all of this can be challenging, but at the same time, it forges you into a stronger person. And so there's actually benefit to you from motherhood for those reasons. Mothering can also be beneficial to your health because it can build your social circles and your social support network. It can strengthen your bond in your romantic relationship, in your marriage or partnership. I think this is especially true when women step away from, or women and men, step away from looking at marriage as, you know, this is something that will fulfill me, and instead look at it as this is a partnership. And I'm not saying that it should be loveless or anything, but looking at this is a partnership, this is a life that we're building together, this is a family that we're raising together. I think that brings strength to a relationship and is really beneficial overall to you and your outlook on life and your well-being, to know that you've got a partner who's got your back and that you guys are in this together and that you're growing and developing together. And children are often a glue or a bond that helps that to happen more easily. Now, I do have in mind to do a podcast episode that tackles divorce and women saying, you know, it was better for me to leave and this, that, and the other. And I have, you know, my first marriage was a similar situation to that, where like I thought that jumping ship was the better option. You know, he walked out on us, but I did a lot to contribute to the breakdown of that relationship. And I can say that in hindsight much more easily than I probably could at that point. But I still think that, you know, when we look at it, and especially when you look at a traditional marriage where, you know, people were more likely to stay married and try and work through things. Of course, there were toxic situations. But I think that one of the benefits of having children can be that you're able to build a relationship that is a partnership, but also a romantic relationship. So it's more than just a partnership or a roommate situation. It needs to be, or else it becomes stilting. And it's more than just a vehicle for each individual's personal growth. And it's more than just a vehicle to raise the child. But if you're committed to your children, you may be more tempted, more prone to, I don't know, neither of those words are right. But anyways, you may be more likely to also explore what you can do to build your relationship because you put higher value on it because you want to keep it together for your children. And I know that that's a can of worms, but I just want to offer that as a thought experiment for you, that if I say that it's good for my children to stay in this relationship, and I'm not in an abusive relationship or anything like that, then maybe it's worthwhile to invest in my relationship. And then ultimately having the children benefits me because I've learned more on how to invest in a romantic relationship and how to make that better and how to enjoy that. And I now have that as an asset to me that will hopefully long outlast the time that my children have left the nest, so to speak. And then also as a mom, you build up an expanded social community and support. That's one of the reasons I've talked about a lot recently, about finding local communities, local groups. It could be a baby story time at the library. It could be a breastfeeding support class or a new mommy class. As your kids get older, it could be something related to their school or homeschooling. But as a mom, you are more likely to build a social circle where there's a level of support. I know that for me as an introvert, I don't have a lot of friends, but I do have some very good friends who have been there for me through thick and thin and whom I enjoy sitting and talking to and being able to hear what's going on with them and them hear what's going on with me. So even though I'm not one who's going to go out with a group of girlfriends, though when my kids were little, I did really enjoy going to mom's groups. But now it's more like a one-on-one friendship, you know, going out and walking with a friend or going to the, you know, coffee shop and getting a cup of tea or something with another friend. You know, that's really important. And I think that having those relationships is important. We know that one of the reasons why men struggle is because they have fewer social relationships. And so I think as a mom, when you're able to make those relationships, that can be helpful. And just having that support structure can be helpful. And maybe it's a woman thing anyways. And if you were a single woman or a woman without children, you would end up with a lot of social interaction too. But I think sometimes that we come into contact and we meet people and make connections that we wouldn't have otherwise made without our kids. Now, I already hinted a little bit on like cognitive impact, because I talked about the fact that we think that the microchimerism may impact cognitive, but we do know that mothers have changes in cognition. Their brains are definitely different than non-moms, and it seems to have a protective effect as women get older on cognition, on memory, on just mental functioning and clarity. And there may be a reduced risk of neurodegenerative disease for women who have had children. And I think that's pretty exciting, because again, and one of the stereotypes is that, your children just ruin your health and they leave you like depleted and everything. But if instead you think that, no, they may help me be more youthful and they've reduced my cancer risk, and if something happens, my children's cells are going to be in there working like little, working probably much harder than I've ever get my kids to work. And then when I'm older, I'm going to be less likely to have Alzheimer's or any of these diseases because I've had children. That is really exciting. And I think especially when you pair that with what I said, looking at that preventative medicine, but actually looking at preventative holistic lifestyle. If you make those changes pre-conception or in pregnancy for the health of your baby, and then maintain those changes as you go along, not only are you going to have all of those direct health benefits, but you're going to have the indirect health benefits of better metabolic health, lower problems with insulin and inflammation and all of that. You're just going to enjoy overall a healthier life. And I think that's really, really going to help you. And so I mentioned this song on a previous podcast episode, and I couldn't remember a lot of it, so I wanted to bring it back up here. It's I Lived by One Republic, and I actually listed out some of the lyrics. Again, I've been talking for a long time at this point, so I won't put y'all through trying to listen to me sing it. But the lyrics go, I did it all, owned every second that this world could give, saw so many places, the things that I did. Yeah, with every broken bone, I swear I lived, because in the song is actually about a kid he's doing all kinds of stunts and stuff because he's got an illness. But anyways, it says, hope that you spend your days, but they all add up, and that when the sun goes down, hope you raise your cup. And I love that song, because to me, even though the song is talking about a kid, I think he's got cystic fibrosis, so he's a young man, really, not a kid. And so if you watch the music video for the song, I'll see if I can find it. Maybe I can embed it on the show notes page. He's, you're seeing him celebrate what he can get out of life. But I think it's so true to consider and to ponder as a mother. And think about the fact that so many of us seem to think we're going to finish school and then we're going to graduate and then we're going to be an adult. And that's like the end goal. But the reality is you're probably going to live like 90 years, maybe even more. And what all can you put in those years? You could raise your children. I could raise my children. Like I'm looking at, oh my gosh, like 35 years of child rearing. I'm looking at a lot of years of child rearing. But I will still, once Phoenix flies the nest, I would still be able to go back to school and get another bachelor's degree, complete my master's degree, get my doctorate, maybe a couple more degrees, and then I could still launch a career path. And that's talking about me, who had 8 kids across 16 plus years. So when we think about it, it's like, you can do so much. There is so much that you can do. And mothering is just going to benefit your health, especially when you're looking at staying holistically healthy. So, like I said, I thought this was a fun episode to do. I hope that it's been enlightening and a little bit more lighthearted than some of the heavier topics, but still in that same spirit. And I hope that it helps you consider that you can do it all, maybe not all at the same time, like we've talked about before, going back to sequencing. You can do it all, and you can enjoy it, and you can thrive while you help your children thrive. Y'all can just love life and flourish together, and that is a really, really, really good thing. So with that, I'm going to finish up so that I can go connect with my kiddos. And I believe that our next episode will be in the new year. So I am looking forward to talking to you about some of the hopes and dreams that I have for the new year, as well as for you. I think we're going to be talking about making this the year of the Warrior Mama. So I will talk to you next week, and I hope that you have a blessed week.